my TV, broadcasting, and talent development journey. I used to be content with being the person supporting from the back of the room, empowering others to lead. There came a point when my passion for equality became too strong for me not to speak up. Confidence isn't always a given, and self doubt can be one of the most significant barriers to standing up and being heard. Opening up opportunities and giving access doesn't always equal self belief. It takes encouragement, coaching, and empowerment to enable an individual from an underrepresented background to feel emboldened enough to stand up and be heard. I also speak for myself today and of my own experiences. So, in 2018, I became the inaugural manager of Screen Yorkshire's Beyond Bronte programme, a scheme set up to address barriers, both perceived and actual, that young people from across the Leeds City regions might face when trying to break into the industry. Here's just a short video of what we did.
Beyond Brontes is a programme designed to break down the barriers that young people between the ages of 18 and 24 face when trying to break into the screen industries. It's a very much needed project because the screen industries is growing across the region, and we need to let young people know that they have a place, it's for them, and also what roles are available. So today is called a Get to Know You Day because essentially we've invited a group of young people in that applied, and we want to get to know them, we want them to get to know the project. So we're going to give them a whole overview. We've had panel experts come in today to talk about the industry, the freelance nature of the industry, and also what it takes to get into it.
I'm a girl from a council estate, single parent mum, and look where I am now. I did fashion promotions at UCLan, which is the University of Central Lancashire. I did a year's placement at Marks and Spencer's as a buyer. So that was my role. I was going to be a buyer, which is very similar to costume design. And I got a walk-on job on the TV series Cracker. And that was it. I saw that side of the role and I asked, oh, how do you do costume? And spoke to the costume designer, and when I left uni, I said I can do a week's work experience. By the second day I was offered a job and another job.
The film industry is open to all. You don't have to have done a film degree to get on in the film industry, to open people's eyes to the range of different roles. There's 1,000+ names at the end of a big feature film, and we seem to get loads of people who will want to be the director or the writer or the DOP. Very few people come in wanting to be the accountant or the carpenter or the scenic painter.
I hope that they see the panel, they see Nicole and myself, they see the rest of the Screen Yorkshire team, and they realise that it can be anybody from any background. There is a place for everybody, and if we can do it, you can do it, and we're there to support them.
I think it's important to have events like this because you find out that it is a real job and you can legitimately make a full career out of this if you get the right opportunities, and these are those opportunities.
In Yorkshire, in the north at the moment, there's so much work going on, there's so many roles that need filling, and there's so many jobs at entry level that, you know, it's a possibility for them to gain experience and get into the TV industry.
So after today, we're going to whittle this down to our final 50 participants because we have 50 people to work with over the next year. I mean, this will be happening again next year, so anybody that doesn't get through this year, I would urge them to reapply. This scheme is for everybody. We want to make sure that we have an industry that represents the country, that represents the people that watch TV. So anybody who's out there that didn't apply this year, please apply next year. We have an ethos of wanting to signpost you. Even if Beyond Brontes is not for you, we will signpost you to other agencies that can help, because we want to build an industry that is world class and world leading.
To get to the heart of my lived experience, I need to go back to 2008. Up until then, I'd had a varied career, from insurance to banking. I was cleaning houses for my mum at one point. And one day my son came home and told me people didn't think he was black because he didn't fight. And it was at that moment I realised that my son and his peers didn't have a positive representation to refer to when watching TV and viewing wider media. Representation has always been important to me, and I decided that I needed to help drive the change that we wanted to see. I'd always had a passion for TV, and it was at that moment that I decided to pursue a career in television and become an advocate for change. It became evident to me that the images depicted of the North were working class, bleak, grim, filled with grey clouds and very white. When I talk about the North, I'm specifically looking at Yorkshire, the place I grew up, the very place my Black identity on screen and off screen isn't represented. If we are to make real change, we need to look at all of the nations and regions and include them in the data. If we don't have an accurate picture of what the workforce looks like, how can we positively look to work to change and encourage new entrants and those who wish to return to the industry and reassure them that change is a priority? Representation matters. And until we actively look to address this, Mason and his peers will always see their stories told by a dominant culture that sees their experiences through a narrow range of stereotypes. If I refer to my own journey as a Black Yorkshire woman, representation affects the way that I view my own place in TV. I love my job, but I can't help thinking if I had ever seen a Black sports producer in my region who had made it and not had to move to London or Manchester, where would I be now? While at ITV, I became co-chair of ICV Embrace, an internal staff resource group. This platform was supposed to give me the opportunity to speak up, to ensure that the North was represented and the inequalities that manifested in the regions were acknowledged. However, even when having this platform, I still didn't really feel empowered to speak up. And this was because as somebody who was in a junior role, I felt my voice and influence would only go so far. Yet I did feel confident in voicing my opinions about some topics, which included discussing the need to make sure a one-size-fits-all approach wasn't used when thinking of schemes and initiatives. For instance, the schemes that work in London won't necessarily work in the regions, and this was due to a range of factors such as demographics, social and economic factors, and the lack of access to established media organisations. Beyond Bronte's took me on a journey that allowed me to be loud with my advocacy. A title can make a massive difference to how people rank your influence. When coming up with a framework for Beyond Bronte's, it was important that we got out into communities and engage with underrepresented groups and organisations that might not have considered a career in film and TV. You can't be what you can't see, and you can't apply for roles you don't know existed. Outreach and building trust was the foundations upon which Beyond Bronte's was built. My journey to this forum today hasn't been and still isn't an easy one. I'm often asked to use my experiences, especially when it comes to the DEI space. But when I'm specifically discussing race and representation, it exposes me and my experience, which at times can be painful. Students and organisations alike ask me to share my experiences. As a Black woman in this industry, I know there's a fine line between me telling my story in its rawest sense or me diluting that story to make sure it's palatable so those in the room don't feel uncomfortable or feel they need to ask for specific examples or descend into whataboutery. You know, I've experienced a similar thing. It's not just Black people that happens to. Whataboutery is gaslighting, and in my view, a way of silencing experiences by coming up with an alternative view that negates lived experience. It's when someone asks you to educate them on what microaggressions and racism is, and honestly, it's tiring. Organisations must take the time to consider the pain and the trauma this will invoke before asking for personal experiences. I can only speak for myself, but bringing up experiences I've had to repress, knowing I might be attacked or questioned or possibly lose out on opportunities, isn't easy. And this relates to the topic of safe spaces that we'll discuss later on. There have been lots of conversations in the media about anti-Black and anti-Asian hate and how this has affected Black and Asian Britons. The lack of anti-racism advocacy and the unwillingness for major organisations to come out and tackle this head on has caused little to no movement on addressing inequality. Thierry Henry left social media in a bid to force media outlets to tackle online abuse. In our own industry, Black and brown creatives have had to face online abuse with no redress, knowing the perpetrators will get away with it. This is both disheartening and tiring. Posting a black square in a statement just isn't enough. I'd like to play you a video on what safe spaces are.
My journey into leadership began in the medical school, where we train medical students. And in the area of women's health, I'll tell you, if a student approaches a patient in the wrong way, that patient will leave the health system at a drop of a hat. And so I felt that it was my responsibility to make sure that we were going to produce healthcare providers who really had heart. I then started leading a group of advisors in our new medical school, and we started out advising students with no skills. And we established a beautiful learning community where it's very safe to say what you know and what you don't know, and develop faculty development and mentor one another in a very safe space, and that sort of defined who I am. Every patient I meet, every student I meet, even if I'm on an airplane, everyone will tell you, I'm interested in developing somebody else. I feel like true success means nothing if you don't give back, and if you don't look around and see if you can sort of reach out and help someone else accomplish some of what you have. When you're leading a team, one of the important things is for you to establish a culture of feedback and reflection on that feedback, so that you can sort of figure out what are the gaps that you need to fill in your own personal growth. It helps your teams in several ways, including people tend to be more open to sharing their insights. And that is what you want. You want people to share the ideas that are quiet, that you don't see in everyday interactions with them, because sometimes that's where the innovation for what you're doing comes from. And in order to establish a culture of feedback and reflection, making it safe so that you're not judgmental, so that people feel like they can come and put any idea on the table, including, I might not know the answer. So that allows other people in the team to sort of step up and say, well, my goodness, I can help you out in this way. So when we talk about a safe environment, that's the culture that I'm really talking about.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
You should become a multiplier. When you're a multiplier, you allow a lot of creativity to come from your group. You show your team members that you value their input and the expertise that they bring to the table. And usually that'll actually reward you, because your overall performance will be a team and not just you pulling all of the effort. So I would tell you, become a multiplier.
I'm not sure where I first heard the term safe space, but as soon as I did, it resonated with me. I'm not a fan of networking. I do it because it's a big part of my role and essential to building contacts. I'm an introvert at heart, and over the years, I've had to teach myself techniques to cope with this. I walk into rooms where I might be the only Black woman or often the only woman of colour, and the feeling of isolation overtakes me. I've come up with techniques over the years to try and overcome this. A big smile, bright red lipstick, perfecting my small talk, trying to make sure my large frame doesn't make anyone feel uneasy. I spoke to an old school friend recently, and she reminded me how full of spirit we all used to be. She asked, when did that change and self-doubt become the barrier we now stumble over when it comes to showing people how creative we are? When I walk into a room, I never know what's going to be said. What am I going to have to ignore or smile and nod at? The fact that I have to prepare myself mentally for events makes the need for safe spaces essential for me. An example of a safe space was before lockdown. I would use my Fridays to meet with other Black women. Sometimes our meetings would be just to share knowledge. Other times it would allow me to have a space where I could be myself, my whole genuine self, where I didn't have to worry I wasn't being clear and that I would not be understood. Encouraging and supporting safe spaces is fundamental to creating inclusive environments, whether that be in the workplace or in an educational establishment. If people don't feel free to be themselves, to learn, grow, and to make mistakes, the environment can be draining, and as a result, people leave. In my current role as Director of Talent for Think Bigger, our ethos is skills, confidence, and insight. Simply put, we recognise in order to empower new and existing talent, we need to create a safe space where they can develop skills, build confidence, and gain insight. Over 10 years, Think Bigger has been on a mission to help people in TV and media. Over 200 trainees from across the UK have benefited from the work we do. It's important to us that that support doesn't end when the role finishes. When I first met Managing Director of Think Bigger, Edie, we were both on a panel together. It was at that moment, after meeting her, that I understood the power of being supported. Even though she had never met me before, she took the time to check in with me, to listen and to support me, and that encouragement empowered me to think of myself as a professional woman who could take up space in a senior position. I will never forget her words to me when I accepted the offer to join Think Bigger. I thanked her for allowing me to step up to this role, and she said, "Sam, you haven't stepped up, you've moved across." I'm part of a company that values my whole self, and for me, this is what an inclusive, creative workplace feels like. It's my safe space. I want to play a video for you now from the Creative Diversity Network, and it's based on statistics and evidence. I'll just get to the point that I think is relevant.
It might sound a bit philosophical, but actually it has very practical implications. Statistics are widely agreed language for describing a situation. We have agreed as a society over sort of centuries of years that if we count stuff up and calculate percentages, that means something, that gives us a picture of something that's happening. That's not necessarily the natural state of things. There are societies that place far more emphasis on verbal storytelling, but numbers have become our form of storytelling. And they've become quite an international form of storytelling as well, for better or worse reasons around the globe. But it means that we now have a form of storytelling in numbers that's quite accepted both in the global north and the global south. And if we're talking matters of diversity, inclusion, and opportunity, that's actually a point worth noting. Statistics, or data, as we've called it throughout the day, are also what I've called a high-value currency in advocacy and policy making, or in decision making in business. Mava, very early in the morning, called it the only thing executives will listen to is numbers. So there is a high value placed on numbers. We accept numbers for making an argument. We accept numbers for making our case. Again, not the natural state of thing, but a convention. This is where we're at, and that's worth drawing attention to. The third point why statistics are so important is methodological. And Anne Oakley has this nice phrase where she says, without quantitative data or statistics, it's difficult to distinguish between personal experience and collective oppression. What that translates into is when we're looking at diversity, inclusion, opportunity, we're looking at problems of scale. And quantitative statistics are quite a good measure for dealing with those. So, they're important. And I said we need more and better statistics. And what do we need more and better statistics for? We've got a number of quite significant gaps in the statistics and the data that we have at the moment. The first one I'll mention is the gaps in the diversity characteristics that are covered. This is a little graph, you don't need to read too much of it, from work that the Cameo Research Institute has done for the BFI, was published last year, that looks at how current research into workforce diversity deals with different diversity characteristics. And what that shows us is that way more than half of the research actually talks about gender in some form or other. I know it does say gender or gender reassignment at the bottom, but really it's gender, it's not gender reassignment. That nudging half talks about race and ethnicity, so we're knowing a little bit more about that. But we know very, very little, for instance, about location or sexual orientation. So there is quite a very different gap of, there's quite a variance, quite a gap in coverage in how we actually look at different aspects of diversity.
So In my opinion, the best way to protect and support underrepresented groups within our organisations or across the industry is to first acknowledge that we need to do better, gather detailed statistics so we can see where the gaps are, both nationally and regionally. Creating inclusive working environments and widening outreach to attract new talent is vital. It's not enough to just bring people in without considering how they will be treated and supported within the creative environment. I often hear anecdotal stories of challenging work environments. People feeling that they won't progress because they don't want to join after work drinks, being criticised for wanting to progress, and being told they want to move up too quickly. Project Diamond is a voluntary online system used by major UK broadcasters to capture diversity data to make sure it's consistent across on-screen and off-screen talent. The BFI has set out contractual diversity standards for anyone applying for its funding, making sure to break down what the protected characteristics are and also address regionality, socio-economic factors, and those with caring responsibilities. As the earlier video suggests, data is vital to assess where the gaps are. Take a look at your workforce. Do you have a good mix of individuals from different backgrounds? What does your outreach look like? Is your essential criteria fit for purpose? Have you ever considered mentoring talented individuals you've met that could benefit from your knowledge? The journey towards a diverse workforce doesn't begin and end with recruitment and outreach. Engaging and letting them know where their place is, letting them know there is a place for them is one thing, but keeping them and developing talent is another. When you employ diverse talent, during onboarding, ask what you can do to support their journey. Make sure they realise this is a fluid question and support is key to company culture. Development isn't a dirty word, so make sure this is also part of the support you give them. Moving up in the organisation and building skills is part of the journey to having senior leadership teams that reflect society. I hope you agree with me when I say there is power and influence in a job title. When I became programme manager of a diversity scheme, my circle of influence changed overnight. For 6 years previous to this, I was just a coordinator across various roles. It didn't matter how much I developed independently, done community events, panel discussions. The fact I was a coordinator meant these outside skills weren't valued the same way because I didn't acquire them within the organisation. In industries outside of film and TV, the move between grades is structured and defined. You might expect quarterly reviews with your line manager, who would assist with a development plan that would help with the next steps. For freelancers, this doesn't exist. Rolling employment, employing people you know, varied work practices, and short-term roles means there is no defined timeline of what adequate experience looks like. At what point do you become experienced enough to be considered for senior leadership, or even move from entry to mid-level roles? Every level of the industry needs diversity, not just the entry level. Schemes are really good at introducing, training, and empowering talent, but it's important that progression into mid-level and senior roles is part of the plan too. According to Ofcom's Diversity and Equality and Opportunities in Television and Radio report, disabled people are underrepresented at all levels, all organisational levels overall. Only 7% of television employees were disabled, compared to 13% of the working age population. Minority ethnic people, and particularly Black colleagues, are underrepresented in senior roles across the industry. 8% of those employed by TV broadcasters in senior management roles are from a minority ethnic group, compared with a national workforce average of 12%, which increases to 35% in London and 31% in Manchester. Black colleagues are more underrepresented in senior roles than any other minority ethnic groups, at 1%, compared with 3% of the working population. I'm a mother of four, and like everybody else, job security, progression, equal and fair pay are vital. Metrics are important, and gathering data to make sure gender and ethnicity pay gaps, progression, disability, ethnicity, and age are monitored and acted upon is important. In 2020, the James McTaggart Lecture for the Edinburgh Film Festival introduced Professor David Olusoga, where he gave his keynotes. After months of gut-wrenching conversations around Black Lives Matter and the murder of George Floyd and the treatment of Black people in this country, the lecture was an important one. Nothing said in this lecture was new, but at that moment it felt like the industry had to listen. The world was upside down and the moment had come for everyone to look at itself. I'm not ashamed to tell you that I cried through this lecture. Having considered leaving the industry on many occasions, I felt every word of what he was saying. I wish I could play the whole thing, but instead, I've chosen a clip that is relevant to my point.
About the mountain industry, we collectively have been aware that the people who commission and who make the UK's television programmes do not look like the population at large, our audience. In 2016, Directors UK reported that just 2.2% of the programmes in the UK were made by BAME directors. And of the directors on their database, just 3.6% were BAME, which means that even though the industry has long claimed that it is crying out for black producers and directors, many of those who were already in the industry were not getting work. Then there's the problem of retention. In their submission to the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, Film and TV Charity reported that even before the current crisis, 73% of BAME production talent had considered leaving the industry. In the time I've been in television, the vast majority of senior black industry figures I've come across working within the UK broadcasters have either moved to the indie sector or left the industry. Some of this is normal churn, but some of it is not. That exodus of diverse senior production talent has, I believe, left the industry exposed. One of the sessions at this year's Edinburgh Television Festival asks, when will television have its first black channel controller? 12 years ago, the festival ran a similar panel asking the same question. Will the festival of 2030 have yet another panel asking that same question for a third time? We are all so used to this state of affairs, I believe, that we would struggle to imagine what proper representation would look like. If you were to walk onto a filming location in London and 36%, more than a third of the cast and crew were people of colour, you really would notice it. It really would feel unusual. And yet, all that would represent for a London production is a proper reflection of the ethnic makeup of that city's workforce. But of course, none of us have had that experience, because that never happens. Ask Steve McQueen, who in June said that although the lack of inclusion of people of colour in TV is undeniable and undeniably wrong, many people in the industry, he said, go along with it as if it is normal, when in reality, it's blatant racism. It's wonderful that our industry has figures like Steve McQueen and others I could mention, but there is a risk that we point out those exceptions and use their talent and their achievements to hide from the wider reality. I want to be clear that I stand here today not as one of the TV industry's success stories, but as a survivor. I am one of the last men standing of TV's lost generation. The generation of black and brown people who entered this industry 15, 20, 25 years ago with high hopes and ambitions. I'm a survivor of cultures within TV that failed that generation. And I'm here because a handful of people used their power and their privilege to help me.
To address this problem, the industry really needs to commit to longer-term contracts for those from underrepresented groups, a commitment to sponsorship rather than mentoring. The difference between the two is the nurturing of talent and the promotion of that individual to other key stakeholders. If the issue of lack of Black people in senior roles is experienced, the only way to get it is to actively commit to making sure they have access. So in 2008, when I started my media degree, even though at the time Yorkshire TV no longer produced children's TV like My Parents Are Aliens, a firm favourite in our house, there were still opportunities available via Countdown, Heartbeat, The Royal and Emmerdale. Regional TV was still a possibility, and the likelihood of joining the industry felt hopeful. I still remember the day it was announced, just towards the end of my first semester, that ITV was to cut 600 jobs, with a bulk of those being in Leeds. I can't begin to tell you how devastating this was, even with Media City on the horizon. What was once a possibility became a needle in a haystack. Travelling to Manchester wasn't an option, and 6 a.m. calls for short films again wasn't feasible for me. My media and marketing degree didn't give me the knowledge and skills I needed to fully understand what the TV landscape was. When I left, I would have worked anywhere just to grab an opportunity. I had no idea how to get in, who to approach, and most importantly, I didn't see anybody who looked like me that I could ask. I'm not suggesting they weren't there, but because I didn't know anything about the structure or the opportunities that were available, I had to seek opportunities outside of Leeds in order to build my foundations within the industry. I did, however, find the creative skill set, as it was then known, very helpful, but the challenge was also no experience meant no interviews. In my opinion, the regionality of the UK has sown a divide between the metropolitan elite of London and how the rest of the country operates, which is exacerbated by race and ethnicity. Clearly, there is still a massive disparity, but I believe you are more likely to have access to schemes, work experience, and industry events if you're based in the South. Major organisations tend to do their outreach close to where their head offices are. Channel 4's move to have its head office in Leeds was a major step forward. Even though Channel 4 don't make their own content, the prospect of a major broadcaster focusing on the nations and regions was the beacon of hope we needed. Television and film in the regions have rarely reflected the different cultures that live there. Coronation Street, a major British show, didn't have a Black family until 2019, with Emmerdale announcing just last autumn that they were following suit. Two major northern cities with large nightly audiences, and neither had a cast that reflected the regions they were based. I'm passionate about diversifying the industry, in particular within my region. Bougie Media is a company I set up after graduating in order to get myself and my fellow graduates opportunities to build our portfolios. I've long pushed to promote the screen industries within schools so young people can have access to the support and information they need if they choose to apply for apprenticeship or freelance careers within the industry. We have a lack of Northern Black and brown voices within the screen industries. There is no doubt about this. I have been lucky enough to meet so many talented people in this region that deserve to be seen and heard. It's imperative that as an industry, we do our utmost to encourage, develop, and give a voice to Black, Asian, and minority ethnic creatives. There isn't just one Black family who could be on Coronation Street or Emmerdale. The pressure is on Black and brown creatives to speak for everyone who look like them, to be the go-to person about any issue, about race and ethnicity, and this needs to stop. We need to get to a place where we can just do our jobs and just be seen. Our stories aren't homogenous, our experience not one-dimensional, and we deserve to be heard. The reality is that this is going to take more than just words. It's going to take a financial and time commitment. I'm hopeful and passionate to see the change. Thank you very much for giving me your time today. That's the end of my keynote.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for your really insightful presentation. So I will open the floor for questions. Please type your question in the chat if you have one. I'll start with the first one. So what can we do as what can we as academic research help with? What data do we need, but not currently having good quality? So
in my opinion, and as I've said when I was asked to do this, like I'm not an academic, I find you guys so inspirational that your minds think the way they do. But for me, statistics mean everything. I mean, in everything that I do, in order for me to prove that something needs to happen, I need to show there's a need. So if you can come up with the statistics, especially for our region, like I have done a search and I couldn't find anything that said what our workforce looked like across all those characteristics. The BFI have stats, but it seems more national rather than regional. And I think if we're really going to do a good job here, we need to have that in place.
Thank you, Sam. There is a question, I think, related to that. So what can university courses can do to encourage and support underrepresented groups to gain access to industry?
That's a really good question. And I think going back to when I was at uni, I went to a university in Leeds called Trinity, and all sense that it was back then. And if I'm honest, I loved my university. You know, they were very supportive. It again was a safe space for me. But I think when it comes to university courses, if they reflect what industry is like, it will then prepare people from underrepresented backgrounds for what it's actually going to be like when they get into the work environment. For me, my course was very sort of theory based. You know, I learned a lot about theorists, I learned a lot about how to analyze, but I didn't understand what the industry was like, how to get into a role, who to contact. If I had built the contacts from before I'd left, I think that my journey would have been a much easier one. And I think that would be great for our region in terms of we will build more young people in here and even returners to work if they have a good grounding. And also maybe we should do courses that aren't just degree accredited. So, you know, maybe it's just about how do you research, what does a researcher do, but it doesn't have to be a full university course. It's just you teaching the skills that are going to be vital to them getting into those entry-level roles.
Thank you. Beth is writing, can you tell us a little bit more about how you built the Beyond Bronte's framework, please?
So that's a really good question. It was just really I feel it was all on instinct. So when I was at ITV, one of the things I did as co-chair of Embrace was I was really passionate about having young people in for work experience. And we didn't have that. There was a long time where they stopped it because I'm not sure if you know how this works. So I discovered it during that time that not everybody gets work experience as part of their school journey. So when I was at school, everybody had to do it. But then I discovered that my kids didn't, and it depended on the school and whether or not they could afford the insurance, and also whether or not employers were willing to take a group of kids into their building and have staff stop working to help them. So we decided to invite, I think it was 6 young people from across the region into ITV to spend a week across all of our different departments. Just so they got an insight, you know, a couple of year 10s, what does a work environment look like? What does a media organisation do? And it was from that I built the foundations of Beyond Bronte's. So for me, it was really important that we had support. So confidence building was a massive part of what we did, because so many young people don't have the confidence. They don't know what it is that we do. And I think, as I've discovered, I use a lot of jargon, and I would go off to young people and talk to them about like media landscapes, and they didn't have a clue what I was on about because it's not their term of reference. So I wanted to make sure Beyond Bronte's did that. So it introduced them, it made them realize they had a place, it gave them the basic skills, it enabled them to network in the way that made them feel comfortable. And then it also made sure that organizations did their part too. So any indies that we worked with, it was essential that you knew these people are new entrants. They come from a sometimes disadvantaged background. You know, you need to make sure that when they're in your organization, that you have somebody that supports them and allows them to make mistakes and to grow, because that's how we get a new sustainable workforce of people that will come in and stay, is if we do that from the beginning. Sorry, that was me rambling on. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, that's perfect. Sorry, I'll abuse my power as chair. I have two questions actually. The first one is, so what happened during this year of pandemic? Do you think the issue was worsened or not? And the second is it changing? Do you see a change happening? Do you see that your efforts and the ones of your colleagues are bringing some change in the industry?
So this has been a really odd year. So when the pandemic first happened, I was just towards near to the end of the first year of Beyond Bronte's, and we didn't know what we were going to do. So much young people had their own issues, you know. We weren't allowed out. There could have been mental health issues. There was lots going on, and it was just really important for us to listen and to be open to making sure that they knew that we were there and they were available. There was a real worry for me at first that the issue of diversity would get pushed right down the agenda, and that people would think that, right, we just need to consider that people are losing their jobs alone, and that we don't need to continue to make sure that diversity is the heart of what we do. And for me, my job is to get people into the industry, and actually that's a job of building hope. So for me, it might sound a little selfish, but although I had complete empathy for my colleagues who were in production, who might not have been in employment, I had to make sure that the young people I was with felt hopeful, and that the diversity agenda did not slip down the pecking order for when it came to training or even production. In fact, it was even more important, because those people who were marginalised before the pandemic were going to be even more marginalised after. So I kind of had tunnel vision and just went on regardless, and kept telling people, this is important, we need to keep going. And in answer to the next question, was the next part about, sorry, what was the next question?
So if you see some changes in the industry, if you see that something is moving.
I think things have gotten better, but I still feel like we have a long way to go. I mean, the stats still aren't great, especially in our region. Like, we have so much work to do. And it's why for me, when I set up Bougie Media and when I talk to young people, why it's even more important, because so many of them, I mean, like I mentioned, I have 4 kids and not one of them wants to work in TV. And a lot of that is because I'm their mum, and what I say they ignore, but whatever happens in school, they listen to. So like when they're having careers advice and they're only being told, like my eldest son, oh, you like football, go and play football. Or if one of the girls, you like business, go into business. Why doesn't anybody consider that we have a whole industry here that they could be part of, and they could be lawyers, they could be writers, anything is possible. So for me, we have such a long way to go in this region. And I've said in the video I did with Beth, that I feel like we're 20 years behind our London counterparts. And that for me is a massive problem. So there's kind of 2 answers. Yes, we are, but it's still not good enough. We still have, we still need to do more work in the north.
Thank you, Sam. The next question, I think, is related. So to what extent do you think access issues, and in particular the difficulties in making progress within the industry, are structural, fundamental to how the industry currently works?
I think it is. I think once we acknowledge that this industry isn't set up for everybody to enter, I think once that's absolutely acknowledged, we can then get on with making change. And a lot of the times I feel like I'm being radical when I feel like we just need to dismantle it and start all over again, you know, because it's very difficult to unpick. It's like you get the thread and you pull it, and then it's like, you know, let's just restart it all again. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of the things that people know, they've just learned through instinct. A lot of the things I find is it's very difficult to teach somebody how to work on set, because it's not not every set is going to be the same. It's not that kind of industry. So why can't we do things differently? Why is it that we have to stick to a prescribed way when really if we just tried something else, then that might work? And that's what I found in my project management journey. Like if I am facilitating a session, I might have a plan, but I'm always open to change. You know, as long as everybody's safe, why can't we do things a bit differently? There is no reason why it can't. But I think a lot of times people in power find it hard to let go of that power. And I think this is what we need to accept, is a lot of people just don't want to let go. They enjoy what they've got. And if they were to commit to change, they would lose the power.
Thanks. Last one, I think. It's a question, a comment. Can media graduates be encouraged to consider another path beyond employment in industry as school media project mentors? Let's start this early in the primary years and involve popular culture and young people in the design of the process. What do you think about this?
Absolutely agree. So one of the things I'm working on at the moment outside of my day job is, as I said, with Bougie Media, I've been lucky enough to be granted some funding to do some work with some year 9s up to year 13s. But in an ideal world, I would love to start in primary school. I have an 8-year-old who knows how to use TikTok better than any of his older siblings. Like, he really understands it, and he talks to me often about creating content and what that content looks like, and he's 8. So I think that they're ready. And I know, I think it's Into Films do like modules on how film can help with young people's creative writing and English. I think we really do need to bring it to them early so they know it's a possibility. Because if we think that we're trying to get young people when they're a lot older, when they're in year 8 and 9 to consider a change, this is where the problem lies, because in their mind, a lot of them lose hope, especially a lot of the kids I find from diverse backgrounds. They kind of feel like hope is lost, like we'll never be able to aspire to that. You know, that's too far away from us. If we tell them in primary school where none of these things are on their mind, like they don't feel restricted, then yeah, I feel it's absolutely possible. And I'd love to be involved in stuff like that.
Thank you very much, Sam, for your keynote and also the very interesting discussion. Like, if you go through the chat, there are some questions I wasn't able to ask, and there are a lot of, you know, like appreciation for what you shared with us today. So really, really thanks. I think it's a very awesome way to end the morning of for this conference.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I was very nervous, as you know, Isabella, and also Beth, but I'm so glad I did it. I'm so glad I came today. I've enjoyed doing this. Thank you.
Yes, let's clap. And yeah, we are also so glad that you decided to accept the invitation. So last thing, it's a housekeeping announcement. So we are back in panels at 1:30 British summertime. So please all stay connected to this main room to join breakouts when they begin. So switch off your camera, switch off your mic, or show us what you're eating, but please stay in the room.
Bye everyone. Have a great session. Bye.
Thanks, Sam.